Good afternoon, business students. So, article from today's Times, the link is down the bottom for you. Primark owners, Associated British Foods, their profits are soaring on as their profit margins are recovering. So, I thought forms of business, because ABF is the parent company, they are definitely a conglomerate. Now, you don't necessarily need to understand conglomerates, but you do need to understand parent companies. And because this conglomerate did very well during COVID, even though Primark was closed because they don't have a website, I thought this was a great opportunity to explore conglomerates and Primark's business model. So it's a bit of post-COVID, fast fashion, fits in with paper 3. It's a lot to do with forms of business and these massive PLCs that own a product portfolio. So we could look on this as our portfolio, Boston Matrix style of question, or we could focus on this. I also had some other thoughts as well, but first of all, the concept that we talk about in class is that I give you the power to see the future. You will see my AI created crystal ball with fast fashion in it. So if you think about it, the exam paper was written at least a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, and if you're reading the news, you know what's going on now, and you know what was going on 6 months before they probably wrote the paper. So if we think about it in the news, a quick Googling this morning, so 2020, old news, way before the paper was written, we can see COVID, lockdown, shut all the stores, no online presence. They've got these huge rents that they've got to pay, and Primark, as a standalone business, would probably struggle. But they are part of ABF, and in their portfolio, they own British Sugar. They own loads of different companies. And actually, we were eating more during COVID, and we were definitely drinking more. So lots of their portfolio was doing extremely well. Some of them, like Primark, were losing money. Now, there's not many companies that can afford to lose 800 million quid without going into significant debt. Now, if you look at a smaller retail business in fast fashion or fashion, we've looked at Superdry, for example, quite extensively, and they are struggling. And that's because probably they weren't owned by Associated British Foods. Okay, so think about this, July 2020. We then fast forward to January 21, and there's lots of buzz out there saying they've got to go online, they have to go online. Well, they've got no plans to go online. And the reasons we've discussed in class is because of the economies of scale of purchasing their clothes like they do. Also, they don't spend tens of millions of pounds on advertising, which they can pass on through discounts to their customers. They don't have online, which means they don't have to pay for that part of their distribution channel. They also don't have to pay for online returns. And online returns, as we've discussed in class, can actually cost millions and millions of pounds. Okay? It's just not worth it to them at the moment, which is why this sets up for a lovely MOPS if we were doing a 12 or a 20, because we have the crystal ball for fast fashion and we can see the future. Skipping forward, we've got February. So, they predict 1.5 billion sales hit from lockdown store closures. Okay, so yes, we've got, they lose 800 million. They're now predicting another 1.5 billion in sales. Remember, sales are not profits. But then we skip forward. November 2022, they introduce click and collect service. Now, this is sort of an acknowledgement that people want to shop online. Now, they don't want to go online. They don't want to deliver directly to customers' homes. But what they do want to do is get people shopping online and hopefully picking up from 57 locations. Okay? So if we think collect to 57, joining the 25 stores. So there's more out there. Maybe they'll roll it out across the whole of the UK. This could be your question. It could be that you get a case study on click and collect and should they go online? Yeah, so there's lots we could ask with this. And then from today's news, we can see that share prices have gone up of ABF Foods by 10%. Primark profits are now brilliant. And here's a little bit of a clip from Reuters, which is where I took this part of the article from. This is all over the internet today. So plans to roll out click and collect service to all of its stores after a successful trial. Your question could be, should they roll it out to all stores? Well, if it's successful, if it helps with their business objectives, which is probably recouping some of this £800 million loss or 1.5 billion in sales if we go slightly later in time. So, but Weston, one of their directors, this is not a move towards home delivery. And here's a quote, "We're not a retailer that does home delivery," he said. So think about this. This could be a possible focus for questions, quite an exciting thing. And I think most people will say you've got to go online or you're doomed. Well, Primark have proven that you don't at the moment. However, in the future, what would MOPS say? So here's a possible 20 marker that I was considering doing for this. So I thought, since I was considering it, I may as well talk to you about it. We're not going to do this one, by the way. But given the ongoing recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, Primark is considering two options. And I thought profits over the next 5 years. Now, if you see something like this, instead of just profits, next 5 years is not a lot of time. However, they did a trial back in 2022, I presume it was before November, and now, today, they're saying they're going to roll it out nationally because of the success. So 5 years for click and collect maybe is a good window to trial it, but if they're trying to boost profits, one way of improving profits, by the way, is not spending money. So it might be that they stick with their current business model because at the moment it's more profitable in the next 5 years. However, in 5 years' time, MOPS, reevaluate what's happening in the fashion market. They might have to do it. Option 1 is to continue to focus on their bricks and mortar business model. Option 2 is to expand to include online e-commerce offer. Recommend which one would be most effective, this is your hook, in boosting Primark's profits over the next 5 years. Remember, your hooks are normally repeated twice in 20 markers. So we know what the hook is, we know what the two options are. Option 1, pro and con, P in favour, P against. Option 2, repeat, A, J, MOPS. Answer the question, justify your answer by bad-mouthing the other option, saying why it's not quite as good within the 5 years, and then MOPS considering beyond the 5 years. Quite an easy one. Using the case study, you could answer that, and I'll put a case study up in a sec, but you could answer that 20 marker. If you're one of my students, I'm happy to mark it and go through it with you. We can design a mark scheme together. So here's the 12 marker that we're going to look through to do with forms of business and conglomerates. Assess the likely impact. So we've got start of our hook of ABF, we can abbreviate that. Conglomerate structure, this is clearly my knowledge, on Primark's profits. So we've got the aim here. So it's the likely impact on profits in the post-COVID period, as in after COVID. Okay, so we are profits on Primark's profits, not so much on ABF's, but it could be that we get these mixed up a little bit. I think we'd get away with that, to be honest with you, because Primark is part of ABF. Likely impact of the conglomerate structure. So when we think about this, the benefits of the conglomerate structure, however, the disadvantages. And I'm thinking conglomerate, looking at the case study I'll give you, they're in foods, they're in other brands, and they're in fast fashion. So maybe, I think they also own Fortnums and Masons and stuff like that, for example. And then they're owned by a massive wealthy family and an investment fund. So if you think about the counter-argument to conglomerate could be lack of specialisation. And if they just focus on fast fashion, maybe they would be even better. Maybe. So here is the case study. Yes, it's a long one, but I've not edited it down for you. And you'll also notice there's numbers in here. My golden rule as a Dalmatian is if you see numbers, you calculate, especially if it's a 12 marker. If the question said using the data with these numbers, I'm going to have to do a calculation. If it doesn't say that, but there's still something in there, and there's loads of numbers here, there's no excuse for you not doing a calculation and then adding it into your chain of argument to support your answers. Remember, we're looking for those extended chains of arguments, a 12 marker. So we're looking for a demonstration of you that you understand your business theory. But remember, we also need to demonstrate an understanding of profits here, which makes me think if there's enough information here to do a calculation to do with profits, fantastic. Yeah, so we understand revenue versus costs, and we can talk about how they might improve their profits post-COVID. Pause the video and read the case study and see if you can find some information about the forms of business, who else is part of the conglomerate, which other brands, for instance, British Sugar, and also identify revenues and costs. Pause the video, plan it, write it, do whatever you want to do. See you in a couple of minutes. Did you pause the video? Nope. So, I was thinking, I didn't do the transitions on that properly, we'll talk about it first. I was thinking about the form of business conglomerates and of the benefits are part of a big group in different sectors. I'll put up a definition in a second, but the downside could be actually that's against you being in that diversified group. You might miss out on specialisation. And then I look for some possible evidence for my 2 points. And we've got, they could take a hit on they've taken a hit on their profit margins. Maybe that's because they're not focused as much on fast fashion as they should. Don't think I believe that, by the way, but it's something to write about. ABF said generally softer because of cold and wet weather. Well, the conglomerate can't control the weather, but maybe they didn't keep an eye on this as close is probably how I would use this evidence. Okay, so looking at the definition for a conglomerate, it's a bit long there, but if you think about it, so it's not relying on that single source of revenue, as in if they were just a fashion retailer, because probably they would have lots of problems and either be debt-ridden by now post-COVID, or maybe we won't. Someone else would have, I don't know, Sports Direct probably would have bought Primark. So if you think about it, the benefits of being in this conglomerate during COVID lockdown, brilliant. Yeah, we were all eating more bread, drinking more tea, and loads of sugar, especially if it is part of alcohol products. So if you think about it, they were doing very well to do with other parts of their brand portfolio. They were struggling to do with Primark, but Primark was supported, bolstered by the parent company. So obviously we've got profits in the question. I need to demonstrate an understanding of profits, and I went straight to the case study and saw one of the many quantitative bits of evidence in this case study. 124-week period was £9.7 billion in revenue. The profits were 881 million, and it mentions that this is a 37% change. So I can do a cheeky reverse percentage change. There's my reverse percentage change, and I can then take that away from that to get that, and I've got something that I can stick in a chain of argument and wow the examiner that I know how to count. So, assess the likelihood. Here's our lovely standards. We're not aiming for perfection. We are aiming for level 4. And this is a rough structure that I would expect to see in a 12 marker. If you're struggling for time, remember, it might be that you do P, positive impact, P, negative impact, answer the question, justify, and maybe move on and don't bother writing a MOPS unless you've got something inspirationally in context to write. Hopefully that would still get you to level 4, but probably around the bottom of level 4. But if you've not mastered timing now, you need to start mastering survival technique so you finish the paper. Okay, blank pages always get awarded 0 marks. So here's a slightly cut down version of exactly the same definition that we had on a previous slide, so I won't read through it again. And here is an argument in favour. So provides financial stability, can support them post-COVID. The diversified business model, that's an understanding of conglomerate as well, leads to absorbing shocks in one sector by using strong performance in others, leading to overall financial health. Enables Primark to invest in expanding its store network, which it did, and improving store experiences without the immediate pressures of generating returns. Look what's happened to Superdry's shares. Look what's happened to everyone is selling their shares, which is why they're so cheap. Still don't buy them. As seen with the operating profits of up by 46% compared to the year before. Okay, no math so far. Bit disappointing, hey, after that big rant about quantitative, but we've got profit figures there. So this is compared to the year before. It's because of this immediate time pressure, by the way. So they've been able to focus on the longer term gain instead of just panicking and doing something silly. However, this approach could lead to a less focused and slower response to specific challenges in the fashion retail sector because they're a conglomerate. Yeah, they might be focused on food. Yeah, I thought I'd add that little bit of context in the end there, by the way, instead of just because they're a conglomerate. I didn't think that would be explained enough. ABS said trading was generally softer. That's the quote we put in an earlier slide. So, second argument, the conglomerate scale, they are a massive company, helps them achieve significant economies of scale, reducing Primark's costs, boosting profit margins. The questions about profits, this so far is totally theoretical, abstract, but sets the scene for our chain of argument. With the large-scale operations, Primark can benefit from lower procurement costs for materials. Wouldn't it be nice if I'd have actually said something like cloth? And shared services with the conglomerate. Now, we haven't got examples of the shared services in the case study. I could have said something like sourcing finance, for example. This leads to improved profit margins as evidenced in the sharp rise in margins. Operating profits rose from this to this, and there's my calculation dropped in. Now remember, I would have done my calculation at the top of the page. I'm not going to do the calculation on the data extract, and the reason for that is the examiners do not see the data extract. So if you write something on a booklet that the examiner can't see, they ain't going to give you the marks for it. Okay? Great example. Didn't have to write it in the question then. I've already done it at the top of the page. However, the downside is to do with that specialisation I mentioned. Might limit Primark's agility in adapting quickly to market changes impacting their profits, and there is an example of that. External factor, cost inflation, and maybe they didn't adapt to that quick enough. Overall, in a very boring way, let's just directly answer the question. This is when we go straight back and we go likely impact of this on this. Okay, so there's our hook. We would have put a H up there with our plan. And remember, we would have put a K above that and probably a K below profits to make sure we're demonstrating an understanding of both of those. So let's see if the question's answered. Overall, ABF's conglomerate structure likely positively impacted Primark's profits post-COVID. It's not very exciting. It's not even in context really, because that's all in the question. I've just reworded the question, but it has answered the question. So if we were marking this in class, we'll put a nice A next to that because we've answered the question. Let's see if we get the J. Without Primark being part of such a conglomerate, it might have faced significant challenges due to reduced financial support from its parent company. Just consider the alternative. They're not a conglomerate. How would they have struggled? Well, sort of. They wouldn't have got the money from the parent company. Now, thinking about the future, in the future, which we do like that term for our mops, and this is back to our crystal ball because the future is now. While conglomerate structure supports stability and growth, because it did, let's face it, Primark must evaluate its e-commerce strategy to remain relevant in the evolving retail sector. Failure to adapt to consumer buying fashion online could impact its market share and profitability, questions about profit, despite the conglomerate's support. Remember the questions about conglomerate, not just profits and selling stuff online. So it's important that it was linked back, it was hooked back to that conglomerate status. Okay? So we have gone through conglomerates as a form of business. Yes, these are massive PLCs, but remember the portfolio type of question we could get. So this is quite a nice revision activity to think about Boston Matrix, because during COVID, Primark very quickly went to that dog stage. Okay, very quickly. Other online retailers in fashion were selling loads of stuff. Boohoo, ASOS were doing brilliant business. So if you just look at the metrics of Boston Matrix, straight to dog. But they didn't need to put this dog down, did they? They sort of knew after COVID, we'll be okay. And also the parent company can give them loads of cash to get through COVID. So we could have a Boston Matrix style question on exactly the same type of question, case study. Okay, just that you've now got some up-to-date information. So onto the marking grid. Is it level 4? It is level 4. You can decide where it is in level 4 at this stage. I don't really care, as long as it's level 4. Yeah, you decide. If you're one of my students, you can email me your considerations and your EBIs and your what went wells, and